Claudia, if you can just click there and show us what the results are for the poll, that would be great so we can see. Wow. Okay. So how much has COVID-19 changed the current environment? Looks like the majority, overwhelming 83%, think that significantly, and we're going to keep using a lot of these virtual care models after the pandemic. So interesting. Really interesting. I don't know if it's surprising, but I am a little bit surprised that it's 83%. Great. All right. Well, that's really helpful, and that'll help us get started today. Thank you for joining us. Claudia, if we can go to the next slide here. Got a couple of housekeeping items, and then I'm going to go ahead and introduce an incredible group that we have here with us today. We've got Josh Schoeller, who's the CEO of Healthcare Markets at LexisNexis Solutions. Mark Arculeta, I'm sorry, I'm getting a cough, CIO of Bridge Care Health Network with Mount St. Raphael. We have Anupam Gal, who is the Chief Health Information Officer with United Healthcare Clinical Solutions. Ira Klein, who is the Senior Director of Quality for the Strategy Customer Group at Johnson & Johnson. We've got Rich Marino here with us, who's the Senior Director for Healthcare Solutions and a consultant with LexisNexis. And we've got Andrew Renda, who is the Associate Vice President for Population Health at Humana. An incredible group. I'm really delighted they could be here today. We're going to run through a couple of quick housekeeping items, and then we're going to jump right into the discussion. I do want to let people know there is a great resource available for everybody here, and we've got a link to it here. This is the LexisNexis COVID-19 Data Resource Center. And I'm going to let Josh say a few words in just a moment, but let's get through a couple of quick slides here. Housekeeping, everybody is currently muted right now, but we do want your questions. We've got a bunch of questions in advance from folks. We're going to get through as many of those questions as possible, but if you have additional questions as we go through the discussion in the panel today, go ahead and submit those in the Q&A box there at the bottom of your screen, and we will get through as many as we can. These slides are available right now in the EHI Resource Center. Sarah Bryan, and just thank you, Sarah, right on time. Just sent out a link to everybody, so you have a copy of the slides there, and we're delighted to have you download those. This will be available, this full video recording, online tomorrow, so we encourage you to share this. I think we're having a lot of great discussion today, and you might want to promote this or share this amongst your colleagues. Next slide, Claudia. For those of you who are not familiar with the eHealth Initiative and Foundation, our mission is to convene executives who are transforming healthcare through technology and innovation. And for those of you who are not aware, we have a pretty influential group of organizations that steer our company in the direction of where healthcare is going and really trying to push the envelope. This is just a sampling of some of the organizations that we work with across the country. If you don't see your company's name up there, it should be up there. I encourage you to chat with myself or Claudia today, and we will reach out to you and let you know how you can get engaged. But we want to get as many different groups involved as possible. We are involved with all different stakeholder groups, so no matter if you're a provider, payer, vendor, consumer group, we include you in our tent. So please reach out to us. Next slide. We work in a number of different areas, primarily 4 key areas: interoperability, consumers and transparency, analytics, privacy, and security. So great, important areas. For the last few months, though, 2 months really, we've been focused on COVID-19. And that's what this program today is about. If you go to the next slide, Claudia, we've had over the last 12 weeks, this is just, gosh, 5 different programs that we've had. We've had probably about close to 20 different webinars and programs around COVID-19 and resources available to you. This is just a sampling of some of the most recent ones we've had. Really stellar materials, and I encourage you to go online here and look at some of these or browse through the slides. If you're interested in sponsoring a program, please reach out to Amy at our home base, amy@ehidc.org, and we would be delighted to talk to you about covering a topic we haven't covered before or going more in depth on something we have. Next slide. I do want to thank, before I turn it over to Josh for a few words of LexisNexis. LexisNexis has been an incredible supporter of eHealth Initiative, primarily around social determinants of health. And We developed last year, for those of you who are not familiar, a set of ethical principles around when to use social determinants of health. And I'm going to have Sarah actually chat out a link to that document. And LexisNexis, United Healthcare, a number of the groups on the phone with us today were very involved in that, the development of those ethical principles. And it's really an incredible piece of work. So I would love for people to go ahead and take a look at that, and we're going to continue to do that. So I'm really glad that Josh was willing today to support us on this program. And Josh, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Josh Schoeller, CEO of the LexisNexis Healthcare business. First, I'd like to thank EHI for the opportunity to sponsor today. I've been involved with EHI personally for 2 years. It's been a great experience, a lot of collaborative thought leadership across the industries, and it's really been valuable to me and to our business. I'd also like to thank the distinguished panel for their willingness to share their insights today. I'm really excited about the group that we were able to pull together. You know, like everybody probably today, we're in our home offices or our basements in my case, so the new normal has been around for a while. I think nearly 5 months into this unprecedented pandemic. The impacts to both our country, economy, and healthcare industry will be far-reaching and felt for many years to come. And when we first fully understood the gravity of COVID-19 at LexisNexis, we asked ourselves, what can we do to help? How can we help patients? How can we help providers? How can we help public health officials? How can we support researchers? Our mission at LexisNexis Healthcare is to enable the U.S. healthcare industry to operate better and create healthier communities. And for years, we've delivered analytics and data insights to our healthcare stakeholders. But now more than ever, we knew we had the resources that we could deliver on this mission, and we wanted to take action. So a week into the US pandemic, we pulled together a team of our data scientists, product developers, engineers, small group, and we rapidly deployed the LexisNexis COVID-19 National Data Resource Center. It's an interactive US heat map. Coalesces our core data assets of provider information, medical claims information, and social determinants of health. And we overlay this over data from Johns Hopkins and the CDC on COVID-19, as well as very specific hospital information from the American Hospital Association. The result is an interactive heat map that identifies at-risk populations and care capacity gaps across the US correlated to the COVID-19 outbreak. We've had over 500,000 hits to the site since we launched it on April 17th. And every other week we continue to enhance it with sprints. We've just added new insights related to telehealth trends as well as retail pharmacy capacity. More companies and institutions did similar pro bono offerings, and I'm proud of these efforts as they really underscore the commitment of our industry in the fight against this deadly pandemic. So today, as COVID-19 continues to materialize and spread, it's changed so much about how we go about our daily lives, and also specifically how healthcare is delivered. Today, we're here to discuss what happens next, what happens when the curve is flattened. The entirety of how healthcare has been delivered has changed. How will we meet the ongoing changes and demands moving forward? As hospitals and health systems look to open up their doors to non-COVID patients, what are the major changes and impacts to our healthcare delivery system? So with that, I will turn it over to Jen to facilitate and to our distinguished panel, and just want to thank everybody for joining today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Josh. And I do want to just reiterate, we've done a lot of great work at eHealth Initiative and the Foundation with a number of different organizations on social determinants of health over the years. And I do want to encourage you to take a look at a number of those reports and the principles, the ethical principles around the use of SDOH, because I think that's really pertinent right now, particularly with what's going on right now around the country. I'm in Washington, D.C., and we've had a lot of activity here. I was just down there this weekend. A lot going on right now with vulnerable populations, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well, and how COVID has changed that. What I'd love to do, though, is just kind of start off with getting a sense from the group here. You know, we're about 4 months into the crisis right now. Virtual care, telehealth has pretty much become the new standard of care for many types of office visits that used to be office visits. We're now at home. as Josh alluded to. We've got a lot of changes happening right now with the reimbursement models, payment policy, all happened really quickly, and there was a very rapid adoption of technology. And I guess what I'm curious about from some of the panelists is what surprised you the most about the fact that we shifted so rapidly to this care delivery through the pandemic? You know, what was a big surprise to you? Anupam, I'd love to start with you if you can kick us off here. Can you hear us, Anupam? Anupam, are you muted? Oh no. Okay, let's get a let's ping him if we could. Andrew, why don't we go to you? Oh, and you're muted too, Andrew. So if you wouldn't mind taking your mute off.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I would say what surprised me the most was actually how easy the adoption went. I mean, a big portion of our membership are Medicare Advantage. They're seniors, right? So you worry a little bit about how they would adopt technology and things, but we saw a really, increase in the use of telehealth services. And that includes things like behavioral health, which, we're trying to increase the use of anyway. And so, people seeing psychologists and psychiatrists via televisits has been wonderful, because I think one of the biggest things that we've recognized during this crisis is that people are feeling lonely and isolated. And if you have a pre-existing behavioral health condition, certainly this kind of situation can exacerbate. So I think that was probably my biggest kind of aha. And the other, I would say, is that it forced the issue of us redefining what care means. I think when we say care, normally we think of healthcare, sort of clinical type care. But when this crisis hit, I think people started really to recognize that when push comes to shove, we go back to that basic level of Maslow's hierarchy, those basic needs, and recognizing that part of care is making sure people have food and social connection and, stable housing situation. They're worrying about losing their jobs, and so they need financial stability. And so that becomes part of care, and we have to deliver it virtually. So some ahas and some surprises and challenges for us, frankly, to address.
Interesting. So Ira, how about you from the pharmaceutical?
Well, I think one thing that has been a pleasant surprise is our ability to manage our supply chain and do what we said we would promise to do for the marketplace, which is make sure that patients have access to their drugs, reinforce our ability to keep our manufacturing plants safe. We had all kinds of shift work arrangements early on to prevent the kinds of things that happened at food centers of supply distribution. So we hardened our manufacturing safety capabilities. We kept our supply chains informed about what we were doing in order to deliver the medications, to get them there to patients reliably. And we understand that these partners that we have in the supply chain and distribution have their own issues, but I think the government, in a lot of the relaxation of some of the regulatory constraints and rules around various aspects of getting patients what they need in this pandemic situation, brought a signal to the marketplace that others would be allowed to do what they needed to do to make sure that patients were cared for. So one aspect of that is access. Another is, affordability. I mean, I think that the dropping of co-payments and co-insurances let us understand that, access is access and it has to stay that way. And then the last thing is, we think that there's a capability to deliver these value adds to make sure people get what they need the way they need it. And all entities in the pharma industry have patient access services programs. And what we did was we converted a lot of that to educational services for people who really were in distress and wanted to know, well, what do I do when my insurance coverage runs out? How do I manage this problem? I have a chronic disease. So, it's not about just proving the value of the drugs you manufacture. It's proving your value to society. And I think I was pleasantly surprised by our nimbleness to keep those promises regarding making sure you get the meds that you need, make sure you have the ability to afford them, and make sure you understand how to get help when you need it. And, that's been a good thing.
Yeah, great perspective. Mike, what about you? Mike's on the phone with us. Mike, from the provider perspective, what surprised you most about the changes in care delivery?
Definitely on a care delivery standpoint, what I always like kind of bringing in to an actual conversation is COVID-19 may have just saved the U.S. healthcare industry.
Huh.
And why do I say that is because truly the acceleration of digital transformation has been present. And the mass adoption of telecommunicating has been one of the most explosive changes to truly occur during the overall COVID-19 pandemic. And I always state that too, is this crisis fully has displayed the true value of IT and digital transformation. Yes, I am a technology leader and a business leader. And the thing is, though, is the utilization of digital transformation has been one of those massive changes. Because what I always like to say, too, is when we look at the U.S. Healthcare industry, and we look at the banking industry, we look at the oil and gas industry, these specific industries are several years advanced when it comes to technology initiatives. We as healthcare organizations need to make sure that we're leading that pack, because in the end, we are doing the most valuable thing there is, and that is taking care of patients, saving patients' lives. And then when we look at telehealth, we basically see that the volumes of telehealth consults has truly gone up several multiples since the pandemic has struck. And I'm seeing a lot of these healthcare organizations really intensifying their focus on strategically planning for a digital future and really preparing themselves to be ready to launch new initiatives when the crisis passes. And another thing that we basically look at is how are we as an organization restructurizing the culture? I always say that hospitals and clinics are digital companies that happen to deliver healthcare services. We are living in the digital age of healthcare moving forward. How are we basically, as an organization, making sure that we are continuing to build asynchronous tools that benefit our patients both inside and outside of our organization? Because at the end, we know that this pandemic has taught us something. It has taught us that we all have a new CEO, especially on a healthcare and a healthcare clinic organization standpoint. My new CEO is a patient. And if we don't continue to focus on those specific initiatives and innovative ways to provide better ways to basically communicate, better ways to make sure that we are providing and we are building and bringing IT as a core component to the organization, we will not be successful. So moving forward, I always state that COVID-19 may have just saved the U.S. healthcare industry.
That's a really neat perspective. Anupam, we've got you back, so I've got a question for you.
Go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry.
No problem. No
IT
problem.
issues.
It happens, technical issues. I think at the very beginning of this crisis, everybody thought, oh my gosh, this has never happened before. Major concerns about, are we going to make it through this? I think we've all determined we're going to make it through here. We can see kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, that this is a problem we can handle. But, what do you think, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when people look back on this period of time and how we handle this pandemic, how are they going to say that this pandemic really changed healthcare?
I think just to echo what Mike said earlier, I believe all of us will wake up and say, wow, we were able to respond to a worldwide threat in a way that was positive and helped us think about how to minimize damage to people and minimize damage to each other. And I think those are the two things to think about. One is managing patients, one is managing our workforce. And I think we've done some pretty incredible things about how we might respond. And by no means was it perfect, but we've all learned from this. And I think as we think about the future of COVID and life past COVID, it'll be this ability for us to adapt in real time to real crises that will be impressive for us to reflect on.
Yeah, great. One of the major impacts of this has been kind of the adoption of telehealth and virtual care, and this is really changing a lot of the system. Andrew, so as a payer, when you think about the impact that that's going to have on future systems, what impact do you think that's going to have on kind of the traditional brick and mortar services that we've offered? Are those going away?
No, I think they'll never go away. I think there's no substitute for a physician or a clinician putting hands on a patient, doing a proper physical exam, and really getting to the root of what's going on. But I think what virtual care does is enhance our ability to meet people where they are. right? So we can deliver care in the home. We can deliver care really anywhere now that it's virtual. And so, you know, we have more sophisticated ways of assessing both clinical needs and social needs and addressing them wherever is convenient for the patient.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, one of the things I wanted to ask you about as a provider is, you know, the extension of these virtual care services, I think, are causing providers to kind of rethink where providers are geographically and how, you know, where we need care settings. Do we need fewer of them? How have you guys thought about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you know, after the COVID-19 outbreak, you know, telemedicine, as we all know, has been one of those things that have been more active than before. And when we look at telecommunicated initiatives and we look at rural facilities, I mean, rural healthcare has been really, you know, impacted pretty badly by COVID. But again, with the utilization of technology and telecommunicating applications, this has basically allowed us to continue to basically provide better care for our overall patients with the utilization of technology. And I think that's a really critical point. So again, you know, how are we as an organization, as I stated, continuing to build asynchronous tools that are truly going to benefit our patients both inside and outside of the organization moving forward? And then we are truly seeing a big value of telemedicine for saving time and money. But as an actual CIO, before we start investing, in my opinion, before we start investing more, we need to truly maximize the return on the investments we have already made and really work with our leaders to hold the gains from the virtual visits that we're basically doing. So really coming together and coming and seeing what are the pros and cons that we have done with virtual care? How are we utilizing the technology? How are we seeing reimbursements? How are we doing it by different geographic areas? Are we focusing a lot more on the rural areas? How are we bringing, again, that asynchronous tools that benefit our patients both inside and outside of our organization? This is the consumerism of healthcare. We, again, have to focus on our patients' needs. And again, I always quote this as my new CEO is the patient, and we have to continue to utilize strong technology tools and to keep IT and digital transformation as a core component to the organizational strategy in order to be successful, period. And that's been a frustration in this actual industry because we've been behind the curves when it comes to technology. And as I stated before, maybe COVID-19 could have possibly saved the U.S. healthcare industry with the mass adoption of telecommunicating, with the mass adoption of sending people home. How are we communicating virtually? You know, the utilization of better enhanced cybersecurity initiatives, the better utilization of telehealth. We are truly learning from this experience. And again, though, too, is, you know, I believe that this unpredicted pandemic really puts us, again, in a strong position to be more progressive and truly open to learning from it. And if we can truly take the experience gained from this unique challenge, we can truly evolve our practices and continue to invest in those digital transformation initiatives that will allow us to basically transform our industry and take us to a better place.
Hey, Jennifer, this is Ira. If I could add a little to that, because I've been talking to a lot of people and different stakeholders in the marketplace, including the providers, the PBMs, everybody in the delivery system. And what I'm hearing is that this, as Mike is saying, is turning us from system-based care into actual patient-based care. So now we're actually at the same place where the rest of America's economy is, finally, only 20 years later. And an example is how we had 10 years of telemedicine evolution happen in 8 weeks. And once you do something like that, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So I think we can find a lot of other examples that the panelists will have, but these are the kind of comments that I'm getting from people.
That's a great comment. I love that. You know, one of the other things that I think the crisis has really shown a light on is the health disparities issue. And I definitely want to touch on this. I think it's really reflected how a lot of these vulnerable populations are negatively impacted in the healthcare system. And I'd love to hear from the health plans. Anupam, maybe you can kick us off here, but how are health plans addressing this issue with their members?
For disparities, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so Jenna, I think we have some dedicated lines of business that focus on that. At least at United, we really have a strong work in the Medicaid space and the dual eligibles, so both Medicaid and Medicare. So those lines of business are really focused on making sure that the members have a great experience, even if they may have limited access to technology. We hear lots of these members who have trouble getting access to the internet or trouble having technology they understand in their own homes. What we're hearing is many of the elderly patients don't like using real-time audio video, and many of the rules today with the emergency period allow for telephone-only calls, which is fantastic. And now CMS is thinking about pulling those back, and we're advocating to maintain telephone calls moving forward, mainly to meet the member where they are. If they want to do phone calls, let's allow that to happen moving forward. In addition to that work in the line of business for insurance, we're also doing some work around outreach and thinking about homelessness specifically as a primary driver of SDOH barriers. There's lots of ways to address this, but we think that's a place to start, and then food security may be a second option to think about how to address SDOH.
Yeah, that's great. Andrew, how about at Humana?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you mentioned crisis. My question back would be, which crisis are we talking about? Because we had a pandemic, which was one crisis that highlighted a lot of inequities and social disparities. And then more recently, we've had a big spotlight put on racial and ethnic inequities. And so I think we have to approach both of those. Some of the work that we had actually started before the pandemic hit is we've been doing a lot of work in social determinants of health. We did a comprehensive screening initiative where we screened 100,000 of our Medicare and Medicaid members to understand the prevalence of different social needs. And so we found out, 40% have a financial instability, 25% are food insecure, and it goes on to other ones. And so that to us really served as a baseline, that we knew that these social needs, social determinants of health, whatever term you want to use, existed pre-crisis, and the crisis exacerbates them. So those people that already suffer are in worse shape, and those that didn't suffer before often are now suffering. And so it really, called to our attention that, we need to put social determinants of health on par with, clinical health, and we need to close those gaps at the same kind of rate. So we've got initiatives going on food insecurity. We've got initiatives going on loneliness and social isolation, looking at non-medical transportation, different things like that. I think that's really important. And now that we've got these racial inequities that are really being highlighted in the last couple of weeks, we need to put that lens on it as well. Different populations, whether it be African American or Hispanic, experience the healthcare system differently. There's trust issues, there's things that we need to address. And so, we really need to get deep into that and solve for that. Really create the health equity that I think everyone on this call, I hope, would endorse.
Great. Ira, in pharmaceutical and life sciences, there has been, in the past, it's sometimes been perceived as being a little bit biased in clinical trial, not including enough women or not having enough diversity. I know that's changing a lot. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit specifically in terms of how these new vaccines for COVID and drug treatments are being developed right now. How are we making sure they're going to work for everybody, all of these populations?
Yeah, and I think that's an issue that's been on the mind of the FDA for more than the time of the pandemic, and we have been held to higher standards, as you've noted, in the industry for being more inclusive in terms of racial, ethnic, gender, all types of diversity, because, frankly, it's good for our business that all people who are available can be available for therapies that work. So it's not inconsistent with our business goals. I think with the pandemic, what we've seen is a desire, and I think the FDA is listening, for us to be able to use much more high quality real world evidence rather than rely only on randomized clinical trials. And that allows for speed to action, inclusion of a diverse panel of populations, including those challenged by social determinants of health, to participate in the trial design, and with some possible addition of randomized controlled trial methodology, the ability to move our products safely and effectively to the marketplace such that we can then achieve our goals and do it in an inclusive manner. I think other aspects of this include something that we thought about but didn't really act on prior to the pandemic, and I think unfortunately disassembled a little bit, and that is the need to strengthen the emergency data infrastructure to deal with all manner of public health needs outside of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole event just ripped the Band-Aid off of the wound, or I should say, pulled the sheet out from the facade that we actually had a healthcare system that worked and that we had a society that worked. The pandemic actually removed the fallacy that both of those things were true. And, you know, the rebuilding of this actually mirrors in our industry some of what needs to happen in society. We need better infrastructure. Right now, I'm talking about a data infrastructure, including data privacy and security, in order to get these clinical trials done. I think other things include access. The pandemic showed the fallacy of making patients who are sick pay more for drugs. I don't understand how that works. Lastly, just the idea of worthiness. What's the worthiness of, you know, investing in innovation so that you can meet these challenges? I think that that's changed since the pandemic. And instead of having discussions now only about health technology assessment, we can start having discussions about societal benefits of putting in place fixes for diseases and plagues that otherwise won't be fixed. So I apologize for a diffuse answer, but it was kind of an easy question to manage in that regard.
That's great. No, and you know, the whole issue of collecting data around social determinants of health, we worked on this a lot with LexisNexis when we developed the ethical principles. I'd love Rich or Josh to kind of comment on this. You know, one of the things that was so important, and which is why I love LexisNexis, is because the need to kind of adhere to ethical principles. And can you talk about that a little bit in terms of using SDOH data when addressing these issues and why it's kind of important to adhere to those and the sensitivities there?
Yeah, I could take a stab at that. So, you know, there's a lot of focus these days on social determinants of health and how you get information that will provide you insight. You know, I think some of the people on this panel have done a pretty good job, it appears, on doing screenings, questionnaires, surveys, or utilizing census data. And that's certainly many of the avenues people are utilizing to collect that, in addition to a growing but slowly growing use of ICD-10 codes. Another avenue to do that is to get a hold of third-party objective data, which might be able to provide you insight into the economic stability, neighborhood and community context, social community engagement, access to healthcare, education and health literacy, and so forth. So what we wanted to participate with EHI and have people on this panel in regards to is how do you utilize that data and how do you utilize it ethically, right? Because this information you're talking about is considered personal identity information. At a certain point, if you utilize it to understand who is at risk and why they are, that starts to reveal some pretty sensitive information. So we want to make sure that this is going to be utilized throughout the industry, that it's being utilized for the right purpose. So that's why we've developed these ethical principles in participation with this collaboration, which are really around a care management use case. And so there's essentially 4 different principles that we want to go ahead and make sure the industry abides by. The first is recognizing health and wellness risk through social determinants of health analytics. And again, that's building the models, whether it's based on social determinants of health information combined with clinical or social determinants of health in by itself, to predict who is at risk. And early learning we got from that, it's not just important to understand the likelihood of someone being sick, but in order to make it useful downstream to a clinical care coordinator who's trying to align a social service or community service, you need to know what's driving that, right? So why are they at risk? Is it they're socially isolated, economically unstable, and lacking transportation? Now that's information that someone could go ahead and utilize. Which gets us to the next step in the appropriate and ethical use of social determinants of health, which is mapping community resources, identifying gaps. This is taking a more holistic look at populations and understanding geographically where there's a preponderance of certain health barriers. So you can go ahead and map out, where do I want to go ahead and align with the community service, or does it make sense for my organization, wherever you are in the healthcare stakeholder alignment, to invest in that ourselves? How can we go ahead and make sure that there's a resource that's not only there for our patient or member now, but how can we create that so it's sustainable? Because if we just send people to it without developing some type of infrastructure, we'll exhaust it quickly.
The third is obviously care coordination itself and customizing health services interventions. And that's, again, utilizing the information, whether it's from HRAs, whether it's from surveys or what have you, to understand what is the specific intervention or action plan that's really needed, that if we were to do that, it would either close a gap or improve someone's health, or at least prevent it from deteriorating further. And then the final, to make it a cohesive strategy, is service and impact assessment. We all know that our organizations want to do these social determinants of health efforts as part of a larger population health management effort. We all know that 5% of our any population accounts for a preponderance of the cost. And so we want to go ahead and line ourselves to that. But if we don't measure precisely and show the impact that's being created, whether it's by cost avoidance, whether it's by people who are touched, by people who agreed to utilize the service, and then perhaps even managing to figure out what type of episode of care costs were avoided, then we're not going to be able to make it repeatable and sustainable ourselves. We're always challenged to go ahead and show that our projects deserve the most attention. So that's essentially how we perceive that social determinants of health, regardless of where you get the information, it starts to become very sensitive information, and these are the appropriate and ethical uses of it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Rich,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, Rich, I think that's fascinating. I appreciate you saying that. I think foundation to a lot of that work too is standardizing the data sets around social determinants and going through kind of a governance process. And I might just offer a little bit of what we're doing at Humana. We've sort of segmented social determinant data into 3 broad categories. One being known data, and that's what we're getting, like you said, from ICD-10, Z codes, or from validated screening instruments. And so that's kind of maybe the gold standard, I would say. The second layer down, we call inference data, and that's from predictive models, natural language processing, other things like that, where there's some propensity, some likelihood that someone suffers from a social need. And then the third category for us are the geospatial data sets that we can gather from census data, from Robert Wood Johnson, from consumer data. There's a lot of different sources. But, standardizing those sets and getting them into, a big data ecosystem, I think is important. So we all know, what are the terms? What are we talking about when we say someone is food insecure is really critical. And then what you were getting at, I think, with your principles is that the next step then is to apply almost like business rules to it. So what does it mean if I score somewhere on a predictive model and I've got a screener and I live somewhere geographically that says I've got some likelihood of suffering from something? How do we resolve those different data points?
You're spot on, Andrew. The way I kind of look at it is any of these initiatives, there's 3 different buckets to it, right? There's identifying who is at risk and why. Then there's getting it in the workflow so that someone responsible for patient engagement has it at the time of interaction. And then third is okay, now that I have them, do I have sufficient information so that I could be prescriptive in some type of community resource which might be able to solve that problem? All 3 of them need to be interacting and understanding whether you utilize social determinants of health data at the point in time to enable the physician as they come on in to know that they should ask these questions so that they can record it utilizing a Z code, or whether you use it post-interaction to go ahead and find out what additional information you got from the actual patient or from third-party data, whether it be Robert Wood Johnson Foundation or demographic data or what have you. Those are the different ways you could go ahead and organize it so you could get a more longitudinal view of the individual, and hopefully that gives you the insight as what to do to make an impact on their health outcome.
Rich, I just wanted to add on to what you and Andrew said too, just to be clear for our audience, is that this is done in conjunction with the patient. So it's really important that you're utilizing this information as a reference point for additional resources or additional options that is then delivered to the patient, not for making direct decisions without their input and consent.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's a really great point. Someone in the audience just asked that this is all done with patient consent, and it's really for the patient to be able to make better decisions and know what options are available to them. One of the things I think that's come up as a result of the pandemic is we're identifying large swaths of populations that need services, need a test, will need an immunization, will need a treatment. Many people in the entire country, in the entire world, are going to need some of these tests and vaccinations. who's going to pay for this? I know right now under the legislation or the CARES Act, COVID testing is being covered right now, we know. But, moving forward in the future, who pays for this? Anupam, you want to jump on that first as a payer?
Sure. So I think as a payer, we're excited about the idea of doing whatever it takes to manage the members' needs. And if that's done via telehealth, if it's done via phone call, if it's done via text, I think those are all the right things to do. The way our health system is set up today is those things get bundled into some expenditure, and we then allocate that in terms of premiums and where that goes. I think one thing we'd like to avoid is a two-tier health system where some individuals get a higher level of service than others. And so we want to make sure that whatever process we come for paying for it is equitable in the terms of whose pocket does it come out of. And so for better or for worse, it comes out of an individual's pocket either through taxes or through premiums. We want to make sure that those costs are distributed in a way that people feel comfortable that it is equitable or fair in some way or fashion.
Mm-hmm. And Ira, let me turn it over to you. I mean, we've been spending an enormous amount of money developing, 12 different possible vaccines?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and right now I know that there is support from the federal government for this, but, who's going to pay for all of these immunizations moving forward? And are there discussions about that right now? What's kind of the thought there?
I think right now we're in the mindset, as Anupam said, which is we're just going to allocate the resources and do what needs to be done to get vaccines delivered to the public so that our economy can be restarted. Because the foundational principle is if you don't have an economy, then you have no revenue upon which to pay for anything. And
right.
So we're trying to fix the foundational problem first, which is can we get the economy restarted if we have assurances that the critical mass of America will be immunized in the near future. And that's why a significant amount of risk capital is being spent on these immunizations. Now, I can't speak to the decision by the federal government in the Warp Speed initiative to pick the participants, which would include our company, include AstraZeneca, include Merck, Pfizer, and Moderna. I will say maybe it was an assessment of sort of capabilities, maybe not, but we really are not focused on costs right now. We're focused on production because we believe that, as I said earlier, there needs to be an investment in innovation, and we need to make that investment such that I think when you start to come out of the pandemic and you look at other diseases, chiefly those that we've not yet attacked very effectively, which have been in that tough part of the medical care zone of rare diseases, we may look at them a little bit differently in terms of what is the long-term value of managing them. And so it's all about, going, as I said, beyond HTA calculations and into societal benefits. I think we'll manage. I'm not that concerned right now. It's because, the technology is there. We can do it. And I think, as Mike said earlier, it's going to really reflect a whole new set of views about what healthcare is overall from all the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is concern, particularly for these vulnerable populations that, vaccine's not going to be accessible to them. What if we can't pay? So, I mean, that's out there. And I know the payers, I don't know if any of the payers are, or Ira, if you want to comment on that, how do we address that concern that's coming up right now?
I mean, I can't say, and I'll hand it over to Andrew and Anupam. I can only say that our position is to create something that is accessible. There's as much problem with the distribution system right. As there is with getting out something that's safe and effective. So we have multiple problems to solve, and I leave it to the people who pay to give comments on that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that we never want costs to be a barrier to getting a critical treatment like this vaccine. And I imagine that it will come down to something like we pay for flu shots now because we know flu shots, have a health benefit and they ultimately have an ROI as well. And I think, the bigger picture with this, whether it's a vaccine or whether it's telehealth or whether it's, providing meals to address food insecurity, it's sort of the onus is on us to establish a return on health and a return on investment. And if we do those things, then that creates the sustainability, because I think Anupam was right. There are different ways. I mean, there is a cost to all of these things, and someone's going to have to bear that cost. Now we can distribute it out through premiums. We can put it into value-based relationships and contracts with providers. We can put it back to the member. We can take the cost ourselves. But ultimately, to make this sustainable, we've got to show that doing whatever it is improves health outcomes and lowers costs and utilization. So that's mission one, and probably the only mission, at least for my team, is to try to prove those points so we can keep doing this good work.
Anupam, you want to jump on that at all?
I have nothing to add. That was absolutely brilliant. Nothing to add.
Hey, Jennifer, this is Ira. I just want to say that was a softball because I spent 12 years on the payer side.
Well, I want to jump to Mike now on the provider side, because, one of the really negative impacts of this has been on the providers. And we know a lot of revenue has been lost in provider organizations across the country right now. And, we want our healthcare and our hospitals to stay in business. Mike, I don't know if you can comment on that at all, but what do you think needs to happen at this point in terms of getting these healthcare systems kind of back online and sustainable?
Absolutely. So again, just hearing everyone's comment in regards to this, I think this overall pandemic has allowed us to be more progressive. And if we continue to truly invest in innovation, this innovation truly drives transformation. And as I stated too, we're living in this digital age of healthcare, and we basically reevaluate the overall organization. What are we? We are a digital company that happens to deliver healthcare services. But we're also looking at the pros and cons of what basically COVID has brought to the organizations. We're seeing a massive decrease of operations. We're truly going to see an IT crisis of, what are we as an organization going to move forward with when it comes to innovation? What are we going to do as an organization to be more progressive? What are we going to do as an organization to basically continue to invest in asynchronous tools that benefit our patients both inside and outside of the organization? I think COVID has really brought a lot of different curveballs to all industries, and we're truly learning from these different initiatives. But again, I always like to say that we as an organization, if we can really continue to focus on true innovation, focus on true digital transformation, and really incorporate IT as a core component to the organizational strategy, this will take us to a much better space moving forward. COVID-19 has just, again, the acceleration of digital transformation with everything we're doing. How are we doing more with less? How are we utilizing technology as an actual tool to continue to provide better return of investments back to the organization, better ways of delivering care to our patients? How do we do that? And again, technology has been one of those specific items, especially in the healthcare industry, where we have been behind the curve in. But looking at this COVID-19 pandemic, and I always say that, is your home in order? And I think that's a critical component, because there's been a lot of pros and cons to healthcare organizations saying, okay, COVID came, a lot of groups had issues sending people home, a lot of groups had problems basically creating these telehealth clinics. And again, the foundation of technology needs to be a focus towards the overall healthcare industry. Focusing on building, just like when you're building a home, if we're not focusing on building a strong foundation, we will eventually have cracks and we will eventually have problems. And healthcare has been one of those industries that has been so hard to continue to invest in the transformation that is needed to continue to improve on better care. So moving forward into the future, we're truly becoming more innovative. We're learning. We're being more progressive. We now have these open thoughts of how do we utilize this technology to really improve our industry, and again, change the industry to being an actual digital company that happens to deliver healthcare services moving forward, which is going to be massive. It's going to be a massive importance moving forward in order for us to be successful.
Rich, one of the things I would love you to piggyback on is, prior to the pandemic, we spent a lot of time talking about organizations that were not willing to share data, or a lot of proprietary information and concerns about sharing data. And one of the things we really need to do to be effective in healthcare delivery and its system really is to share data. Are you seeing changes in that? Have you seen that? Has it changed for the better? Has it hindered?
There seems to be change going on in parallel, to be honest with you. Late last year, there was regulation, the 21st Century Cures Act, which talked about, you couldn't have information blocking going on. So there's an effort at multiple levels to be able to say that at patient demand, they could go ahead and have data aggregated for them to be on all one silo so they could see. So that's not the end all be all of everything, but it's breaking down the silos of saying that it's okay for an individual's data to be only in one spot and not portable to other locations. So I look at that as a key item, and when I look at the future, that it's going to have to happen. And the other thing happening is we're so excited about how quickly telehealth and virtual patient care has established, and it not only fits the needs for COVID-19, but it's going to fit needs for places where there's not good access to healthcare, for instance, in rural communities post-COVID-19 as well. I think this has proven that capability out. They can serve problems. But what that also does is it distributes your health information amongst more and more entities, right? So in addition to the current regulation, which is being deployed, which allows for aggregation of your information upon patient demand, I think you're to see an increasing need, both at the regulation level as well as the various stakeholders, that we have to do a better job of being able to get that one longitudinal patient record where we understand really what their health condition is and what actions we should be taking.
Yeah, hey, Jennifer, just to add to what Rich said, I don't know if this is a cloud to his silver lining, but one of the things that's going to happen as a result of this pandemic is dramatic rise in Medicaid across the country. And that is one of the biggest things that COVID-19 will change in the delivery of healthcare. In 2007, I think we had 46 million people who were Medicaid eligible. By 2013, we had 59 million. I don't know where it was before the pandemic. I think it was somewhere close to 69 or 70 million. We may have 20 million more people in Medicaid. And as Rich said, those people will want to access care in inexpensive, efficient manners. And this pandemic has shown us how they will do it. So care will get less expensive and more efficient. And in some ways it will do so because it has to be, because we're going to have a lot more people on Medicaid.
That's actually a really interesting point, Anupam and Andrew. I don't know if you can comment on that. Are we going to see a major shift from commercial to Medicare, Medicaid? Are we going to see premiums increase? What are kind of the initial projections right now?
So actually, I think Ira's right. Most of the projections I've seen, and I think my colleagues have seen, at least at United, is that we expect a tremendous rise in Medicaid enrollment based on a couple of things, right? These costs are really expensive. People are losing their jobs, and so commercial insurance should drop. And without a job, it's hard to get insurance somewhere else on the private market. And so I think Medicaid and potentially those areas with Affordable Health Care Act, individual markets may increase, but we think the major increase will be in Medicaid alone. And so thinking about how can we get folks in those spaces to get reasonable coverage makes sense. It's more than just an individual decision, though. I don't want to minimize that. I think states have to make a decision about, if they don't have Medicaid expansion, how will they manage these people who will show up at hospitals and clinics who don't have a way to pay? Are we going to have additional burdens of finances that destroy them? Before COVID, medical bankruptcies was the #1 cause of bankruptcy in America. Are we going to see that expound it further if we don't think about how to manage these lives who can't be managed by private insurance moving forward? Andrew?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think ultimately we really do have to keep premiums in check, just as a kind of first principle, right? Because we need to make healthcare as affordable as possible. One of the really interesting things, though, an opportunity that I find with Medicare in particular, but also with Medicaid and other things, is some newer supplemental benefit opportunities that are coming out of CMMI. And by that, I mean value-based insurance design, or VBID, and then there's SSPCI, which is a special supplemental benefits for the chronically ill. And that begins to allow us to address social determinants or social needs within insurance benefit design. And so I think, I'm a huge champion of that. And, we're beginning to experiment. We began to experiment with that with some grocery card benefits this year. We're going to do much more, next year in 2021 and beyond. And so, having those new opportunities, again, to address social needs within the context of an insurance benefit, I think is a huge opportunity to address these health disparities. But all the while, we have to make sure that we keep premiums in check as we increase the benefits.
I want to do a quick little speed round here because we're coming to the top of the hour, and I want everybody's answer, 5 words or less. Given the, what gives you hope about the shifts and the changes that you've seen in healthcare delivery over the last 4 months? Dramatic change in policy, in the way care is delivered, and adoption by providers and consumers. But what gives you hope? I know we can, I say 5 words, but a few more would be okay. Ira, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think I got the easy one, which is that we're all in it together. We have a shared enemy, and that with that common cause, there's a lot more ability to do partnerships and innovation.
Great. Anupam.
I've just been very impressed and honored by the engagement by providers, by doctors, by insurance companies, by the government. Everyone's pitching in to make this work. And we've done stuff in 3 months that we've never done in 20 years. And so the speed of change has been absolutely remarkable.
Mike, what gives you hope?
Yeah, absolutely. So the acceleration of change, the acceleration of transformation, I mean, all of us coming together to truly transform our industry, which is definitely much needed. I think that really brings us hope moving forward into the future.
Rich.
Yeah, for me, I always look for personal stories that let me know that trigger that something has changed. And for me, it was my parents. So from a father who I did program the VCR for back in the 80s, till now, he has chronic conditions and he's been able to manage them via virtual care and apps. It's something I never thought I'd see happen. And so that gives a lot of promise that the technologies we discussed here today, are here to stay, and they're being widely adopted, even by technology-challenged people.
That's a great anecdote. Josh.
Sorry, come off mute. I'll broaden it a little bit and just say that I think we're not only going through a pandemic, but we're going through a cultural shift in the U.S. as being seen through the protests that have been going on over the last 3 weeks. And we see stories of defunding and changing structure in cities. And I think that healthcare and public service come directly into that conversation. So the conversation started, there's change happening, and we're watching it unfold every day in the news.
And Andrew.
Sure, I echo everyone's statements. I think when a crisis like this happens, many people go back to the really base level of Maslow's hierarchy. It becomes about, do you have food? Are you socially connected? These basic human needs. And what really inspires me about this is that it became an all hands on deck situation. And, we removed cost barriers, and we removed competitive barriers, and we, really as a country have addressed this need.
Well, on that note, we have just about reached the top of the hour, and it gives me hope that we have such incredible leaders such as yourselves helping get us through this. So I really appreciate your time today and your willingness to share with everyone. Thank you. And thank you to our participants for joining us today. I encourage you to reach out and look at the resources that we've pushed out to you today. A lot more questions need to be answered, so please join us for our next program. And everyone have a wonderful day and be safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.